Hello, my name is Olurotimi Osha. I like talking about American presidents. Today, I'm going to be talking about the 14th Amendment. And something I want to do is, while I talk about the history and provide the theoretical aspects of the 14th Amendment, I'm also going to show an application of the 14th Amendment through the judicial misconduct of Judge James Bonifant in the malicious uh, prosecution that he's been superintending against me in Montgomery County, Maryland, which is a 42 USC Section 1983 violation, malicious prosecution, and also a an 18 U.S. Code sections 241 and 242 violations. That's in terms of deprivation of rights under color of law violation. And that's where the 14th Amendment comes in. So the 14th Amendment is very important. It's one of the most powerful amendments we have. It's not part of the Bill of Rights. Its history, it was after the Civil War, and of course, as I said, somebody I've talked about, Roscoe Conklin, was one of the main drafters of the 14th Amendment. Roscoe Conklin was the party boss, party boss for the Republicans and the kingmaker in from New York, Roscoe Conklin, and so the 14th Amendment passed Congress in June 1866, and then it was ratified by three-fourths of the states, three-quarters of the states by July 28th, 1868. So that was under President Andrew Johnson, who issued a proclamation. Even though Andrew Johnson, a Southern Democrat, he was opposed to the 14th Amendment because 14th Amendment was what it has many sections to it, five sections. I know we talk about the 14th Amendment being pivotal and defining citizenship and giving citizenship to African Americans. It wasn't specifically African Americans, but all persons born in the United States or naturalized. So that's within the first section of the 14th Amendment. So there are five sections within the 14th Amendment. I know many of us, we've also referred to the third section regarding the insurrection and disqualification clause regarding the president, and that nobody who's participated in an insurrection or given aid, right, or comfort to insurrectionists or who've incited rebellion against the United States are disqualified. So that's the third section. I'm not going to be talking about those five sections, all the five sections. I'm just going to be focusing on this first section. So the first section has several clauses to it. So and I'm going to be dealing with the last two clauses. The last two clauses, those are the due process clause and the equal protection of law clause. So the equal protection of law clause, that's the clause that's been visited a lot in the 20th century, the 21st century, and it's been the cornerstone of a lot of civil rights litigation, and it's the basis of Brown versus Board of Education, right, which desegregated schools, and so equal protection of the law. And of course, even in Obergefell, we find that it's what grants same-sex marriage as well. So the 14th Amendment, that due process clause, is very, very significant. So let me just say what those last two clauses in the first section of the last two clauses in the first section of the 14th Amendment say. So it says, no state shall deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of the law, nor shall any state, nor shall it deny, uh, you know, any person within its jurisdiction of equal protection of the law. So equal protection, that's the last clause within the uh, first section of the 14th Amendment. So today I'm going to look at the clause that talks about due process, right? So I've already talked about And I've tried to, I've tried to define and give the history and the the legal rules defining some of our amendments. And of course, the 14th Amendment is not a dead it's not a dead law like they say the Ninth Amendment is. The 14th Amendment is very active, and I've tried in earlier videos to just give definitions and give the the history of some of these amendments. I've been dealing with the Fourth Amendment, so you see how amendments can work together. So the Fourth Amendment is, what says that it prohibits illegal searches and seizures in our homes, right? So I talked about how the police swatted me, they came and seized me, they falsely imprisoned me in my home in violation of the Fourth Amendment. That there was a there was a probable cause was required. So let me just recite the Fourth Amendment again, right? And I'm doing all of this from memory. I don't read from notes or anything like that. So if we can try to do that, to then look into our history, and I hope that these videos will help new citizens, immigrants, Americans in general to learn about our laws. So that's why I've been doing these videos as well, because in my case, I have a lot of education, right? I have a law degree from George Washington University Law School. I did international human rights law program at Oxford University in England. Of course, I did history at Columbia University. I also had already, I have another international history and international studies degree from University of Jos in Nigeria. I have a bachelor's in history and mathematics. I actually did mathematics. I was a pre-med major. I've been a biological science major. I've been an engineering major at Columbia, all at Columbia University. And of course, I did accounting undergraduate at Troy University. And I have an MBA in accounting from Troy University, apart from additional training from the U.S. government, Department of Defense and Department of the Navy. And of course, my professional life as a former stockbroker, a financial advisor, portfolio manager in Fortune 500, including Bank of America, Wachovia Securities, which is now Wells Fargo. I've worked for Booz Allen, Hamilton, and a variety of major firms. And so I use my training and put it together to synthesize knowledge and show how we're a nation of laws and how our laws affect every aspect of our lives, whether it's the cultural aspect, whether it's economics, whether it's education, whether it's civil rights, our liberties. So the law affects every aspect of our lives, because that's what happens in an advanced and civilized nation like ours. So today I'm talking about the 14th Amendment, and I'm trying to show how the even our laws are interconnected, right? So the Fourth and 14th Amendment are implicated in my particular case, right? When there was police misconduct, when I was swatted by Montgomery County Police and they suborned perjury, and and it led to a rights deprivation. So there was a Fourth Amendment violation, and let me show you how there's property rights protected in the Fourth Amendment as well. And you see those property rights are also protected in the 14th Amendment and due process of law, right? So the Fourth Amendment, let me just remind us, I'm going to recite it again. The Fourth Amendment says, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and persons or things to be seized. So very important. I've talked about probable cause. There was no probable cause to come to my home in the first place. That was violated, because remember, probable cause has some distinct elements, right? It requires, grounds for reasonable belief that there's guilt, that individual that the police is, whose rights are being violated, has committed a crime. There's reasonable belief, and it includes the elements the facts and circumstances, right? Facts and circumstances within the knowledge of the officer, right? Which are sufficient, right, to warrant a reasonable, which is sufficient to warrant a reasonable belief, right, that reasonable, there's there's reasonable, trustworthy, reasonably trustworthy information. Reasonable, trustworthy information is important, right? And uh, which a uh, which a person of reasonable caution, right, that there is which a, that has that a crime is being committed. So you see all those things. Reasonable belief. Uh, it requires information that's trustworthy, reasonably trustworthy information, facts and circumstances, not false beliefs, facts, circumstances within the knowledge of the officer, right? Which is supported by uh, a reasonable belief that uh, you know there's there's reasonably trustworthy information, right? Reasonably trustworthy information. So if it's somebody, an informant, that informant is trustworthy, right? These elements have not been met, right? Reasonably trustworthy information. So I done earlier videos and I talked about what was going on. So there was a neighbor, Germashumi, who apparently goes to file a perjured emergency. Sorry, he goes to file a perjured peace order while I'm locked up in a hospital after I'd been raided. So apparently, there were, there were indications that later on that came up that was not in the charge statement that this person made a 911 call on May the 16th, 2023, the day the police came. But this person, Germa Shumi, who lives in the same building at 2301 Glen Allen Avenue, apartment 506, Silver Spring, Maryland, 20906. He lived down my hallway, right? I was living in apartment 503. He's the same person I had reported to the police on May 14 for having assaulted me. And my friend had told the police, right, on May 14. I chose not to press charges on that day, right? So that person was obviously was not a reasonably trustworthy person. He wasn't a trustworthy informant. By the way, he can't speak a word of English. He didn't say anything specific. There was nothing particular. He didn't, it was just a 911. So he retaliated in a swatting, right? He did a swatting to target me, to violate my rights. So, those elements of probable cause are not there. So remember again, the Fourth Amendment is supposed to protect our privacy rights, right? It safeguards citizens from rash and unreasonable uh, interferences, right, by the police or by the state, in our privacy rights, because we're in our homes. We have a right to be secure in our homes, to have our privacy and all that stuff. So you see the Fourth Amendment saying the right of the people to be secure in their persons. And you can't just come and seize me in my home. That's my person. And the persons also includes, our privacy, right? And our houses, right? So we want to be secure in our houses, in our papers and effects. Effects again means personal property, tangible personal property, our houses. So these our rights should be secure, right? So I've already been removed, right? So that's already happened. There's no probable cause. I've already done earlier videos showing that no probable cause was met, and uh, I've given because the standards, the elements, of probable cause were not met. There's supposed to be reasonable caution. There's reasonable belief. There's facts, right? Not lies, not fibs, not things that are not verifiable, right? So there's an emergency evaluation petition filed by a man who's impersonating himself as my uncle. There's a court order from Nigeria from my mother saying this man's not my uncle, that he's committed malicious lies. So that vacates the pretextual emergency evaluation petition that brought the police to my home to seize me, to seize my person and take me away from my home. But while that has happened, right, the Fourth Amendment has already been violated. I still have the 14th Amendment to protect me, right, against malicious prosecution from the state or bad actions from the state, because that's what the 14th Amendment works against, right? It works against, it was, it had the southern states who were going to target the new African Americans, right, who were citizens. It was there to protect African Americans against southern states that were still racist, that didn't want them to have their equal rights. Funny enough, this happened in Maryland. Maryland is a southern state. By the way, I'm a United States citizen, and it turned out that on my certificate of naturalization, I was residing in Maryland. Supposedly, it's on my citizenship, whatever. So I'll do another video that's just describing the first clause, the citizenship clause of the 14th Amendment. But I want to focus right now on the due process clause of the 14th Amendment, right? So that protects our life, liberty, and process, right? And property, right? So my life, liberty, and my property should be protected because my property was in my apartment. I had a lease, it wasn't expired. I had a right to continue to extend it many, many months. I had a security deposit, money, right, equal to the amount of my monthly rental payment in that property at 2301 Glen Island Avenue, apartment 503, Silver Spring, Maryland, 20906. So, the 14th Amendment protects me, and the judge, an impartial judge, is meant to observe those rights, right? Because Maryland is in a southern state. It's one of those southern states, they had it in, the government, Congress had it in mind to protect newly freed slaves and all Americans, minorities, against, states where there's tremendous amount of racism that doesn't want minorities or like Black Americans to have equal rights with white people. So I have property. It's saying that no, their property should be protected. They should have equal protection of law. They should have due process. That their life, their liberty, their property can't be taken away without due process of law. So my due process rights were already taken away. I didn't have due process when I was removed from my home. I didn't have due process when Judge Bonifant locked me up for months. And he used fabrication, he used fraud on the court. I've done other videos regarding how he took me away and locked me up using pretext of a false incompetency, ISD, incompetency to stand trial order, right? Violating my constitutional rights. And of course, their psychiatrists, my family have all stated I have no mental illness. So there was no reason for Judge Bonifant to have taken me away. But now I'm going to focus on him taking away my property rights. One of the property rights that he took away was my federal government job. So I had a property interest in my permanent federal government job. I had a job in the Department of the Navy as an auditor. And, so I had a property interest in it because the United States government, the DOD, gave me $5,000 to relocate to the DMV area, right? That's DC, Maryland, Virginia area, when I accepted a position with the Department of Defense. So the as a John S. McCain Strategic Defense Fellow. So and of course, I was hired not as a temporary. I was not hired again in the career service, competitive career service. I took a competitive exam. I was hired based on my qualifications, right? So I had a property interest in my job. That's not what I'm going to talk about. But the Judge Bonifant said he wanted to lose my job. He said it in court in October 2023. So he violated that, right? Taking away my right to work, my economic rights, and my property interest in my job. But I want to focus on something more tangible, and that's property in terms of real estate and renting, the place where you live in, your abode. We have a right to live anywhere in America, right? Protected by the Civil Rights Act. That's specifically Title 8 of the Civil Rights Act of 1968, which was made law under um, President Lyndon Johnson. That's another Johnson. So it's interesting that Andrew Johnson was the one who, signed into law the through proclamation the 14th Amendment. That was Andrew Johnson, and he's the first president to have been impeached. I just wanted to correct that. I had a slip of tongue by saying Andrew Jackson, but Andrew Jackson was never impeached. It was Andrew Johnson who was the first president to be impeached, but he was acquitted by one vote in Senate, so he wasn't removed from office. We still haven't had a president who was removed from office. Again, and President Trump, okay, he's been impeached twice. Bill Clinton's been impeached as well. Um, but none of them has been removed from office. So President Lyndon B. Johnson, our 36th president, is the one who signed the Fair Housing Act into law, which is also it's also Title 8 of the Civil Rights Act. And what it does is it protects American citizens against discrimination in housing, in renting, in property, based on, they can't use race, sex, national origin to prevent people from renting anywhere they're legally entitled to rent, right? So that place I was renting from, I'd been living there for 2 years. The lease was in my name. But after, I was removed, um, this guy called Shumi, the neighbor in 506, who'd assaulted me, and I still hadn't had due process of law to show that, hey, this guy, I was a victim of this guy, and he'd fabricated his peace order. Of course, I reported it to the court. Um, he filed a peace order barring me, saying I shouldn't come to his own property, not that I can't be in my property. So when I was being released on bond, by Judge James Bonifant, the state used a pretext. The state attorney Thea Zumwalt and Judge Bonifant thought so as well. My attorney wanted me to go back to my apartment. That look, let me go back to my own apartment. But Judge Bonifant and the state used pretext that, well, they don't want me to get into trouble. That because if that guy sees me, all he has to do is call the police, and then I'll be locked up again. That was the pretext. Because we were on the same floor, and anytime he sees me, he can just call the police, and the police will lock me up, and I'll lose my liberty again. So they had the pretext, which they were saying in court, that they didn't want me to be locked up again, to lose my liberty again. So that's why they said the judge then used that as pretext to bar me from living at that place during that time period, because the peace order was going to expire in November of 2023. You know, the judge prevented me, that's fraud on the court, prevented me from saying my portion that peace order is a fabrication, right? It's a fabrication that Shumi lied. He committed perjury. I never assaulted him, so that peace order is supposed to be vacated. I'd already called the court, the district court where he filed the petition prior to it was an ex parte order, and where he'd filed the peace order petition claiming I kidnapped him, right? All fabrications that I kidnapped him, stole his phone, said that I was a cop and he escaped. That's a fabrication. The police never charged me for kidnapping. Kidnapping is a very serious crime. They never charged me for impersonating an officer. That's a very serious crime. They never charged me for armed robbery. That's a very serious crime. None of those things. They just gave a peace order saying, okay, I shouldn't harass this, go to his home. That's his home, right? I never went to his home. So that's what the peace order was. But I told the courts, right, from the hospital that this is a fabrication. And they told me to come to the commissioner's office, right, and take an oath so they can go and, because you have to do it in person, so they could go and issue an arrest warrant for him and they'd vacate that peace order. But I was prevented by the hospital, who said it was a judge who said I should be there, so I couldn't go out I couldn't leave. So the state of Maryland prevented me from going to say my side, to be from being a witness uh, in my own defense in a false accusation. So that's also called fraud on the court. They deliberately took actions and gave an ex parte order for something that was perjured. So that was perjury. So the state suborned perjury. Germa Shumi turned out he can't speak a word of English. He can't write English. He wasn't the one who wrote that peace order, right? Somebody else wrote it for him. And there were inconsistencies in the statement. His statement was not what he wrote in the peace order, is not what he ostensibly wrote in the peace order, is not what was written in Police Officer Sergeant Charles Drengwich's statement. It was completely different. The Charles Drengwich statement doesn't say anything about kidnapping, doesn't say anything about it doesn't say anything about any of these things that Germashumi said. So they're inconsistent, they're conflicting, right? So you should know that these were fabrications. So Judge Bonifant prevented me from talking, right, in court on my own behalf to dispute that peace order. So in any event, when I was released, so he said because of that, he gave an order, a condition of my bond that I wouldn't stay in my apartment where it was still leased under my name. I still had a security deposit there. All my property was still in there. My property, my things were still in there. He didn't want me to go there. Instead, he pretextually, while I was locked up, he wanted me to give a power of attorney to my attorney, to not my attorney, but an attorney that Jide Wari hired, whom I had just told that, look, I inherited property. It's back home in Nigeria and was trying to extort money from my family in Nigeria. Lying. He wanted to keep me there. So if he had power of attorney, I was a financial advisor. I've seen how people, once they have power of attorney, they misuse, appropriate the resources of and assets of the people who they have power of attorney over. Right? It gives you authority to take over their assets. I wasn't going to do that, especially for a lawyer who had lied, who was lying to the judge that I was delusional, that I was ill. I didn't know what he said. I didn't know what was going on. He was claiming I didn't even know where I was. He was lying, so he was committing fraud on the court. This is the same attorney who asked for a bribe on behalf of the judge to make the case go away, So you could see where Judge Bonifant had an interest to say I was delusional. I didn't know what I was saying, to defend himself from the bribery he had tried to extort through the representations of the mediation of Steve Mercer, who wasn't my attorney, was just a nominal attorney, was really protecting the perjurer Jide Iwarire, who fabricated an emergency evaluation petition. But in any event, so Judge Bonifant then said, I can't go and stay in my own property, right? So in violation of the Title 8 of the Civil Rights Act of 1968, the Fair Housing Act, because the pretext was to protect my liberty, but that peace order was going to expire in November, right? And before it expired, once I was released, I immediately went to the courts and filed an appeal because it was an ex parte order. The judge who listened was very good. He took time, and I explained what happened, and he saw that I was legitimate, right? I told him, I identified myself. He listened to me. He didn't want them. The guy wanted Germashumi. He appeared in court. I discovered he can't speak a word of English. He was using a translator, and everything he was saying was a fabrication. He was talking about how he and I were friends. We knew each other. All a fabrication. Like I attacked him and I was dangerous. The judge told him to keep quiet, that he doesn't want him to talk. The judge let me talk, and the judge told me that, okay, you know what? I still have a right to file an appeal for a de novo trial. That means it will be redone all over again. That's even though it's a peace order, it's civil. It wasn't criminal, right? So that's the funny thing. He makes these accusations of criminal activity. The state never charges me for those crimes. Never charges me. Instead, they make it a civil case that I should just stay away from him. So this judge who was hearing the peace order, my peace order appeal, said, okay, because it's expiring, right? It was just a few days, and the peace order would have expired. It was like, there's no need to do that now, because there's a deadline. There's a deadline for you to file an appeal, and because I didn't appear in court, they just gave judgment by default to the person who petitioned. Of course, it was the state that prevented me from appearing for the peace order, which was a deprivation of right again. It was a violation of my rights because it had to do with my property rights. The state violated my 14th Amendment protection of due process of law. So that's what the state did. Um, and equal protection of law, because it was now favoring, it allowed Germashumi to have an upper hand, right? And so he got a default judgment. So this judge, regarding the peace order, now said I could file an appeal, but it cost money, right? But I was told that, okay, my attorney could go and pay the money if I don't have the money. And so, and he said there was no statute of limitations for it. That he took the time, went back inside, went to get the books, looking to see if the time had lapsed, right? And he saw there was no statute of limitations. It didn't say anything. He said, so you can go, especially since it's fraud on the courts. When it has to do with fraud on the courts, there are no statute of limitations, right? I could do that anytime. So he said, well, go. But the problem is in Maryland, at least in this court, I had to pay a fee for it. I didn't have the money. So I told my attorney. So I was told, tell my attorneys who were representing me. By this time, I'd fired my attorney. I was now using the public defender's office. But the public defenders, till today, it's 3 years now, they refuse to file those fees, right? And, they could just do some kind of intercourt thing to refile it, because that's a very significant part of the fabricated cases against me, right? Because Germashumi is one who, and Judea who ostensibly brought the police to my home to violate my Fourth Amendment and 14th Amendment rights, right? So, but my public defender, who was co-opted, who's being co-opted by the state attorney's office, um, was now trying for us to suppress that evidence that we know is fabricated, because all we have to do is show the courts that this is fabricated evidence, right? So it's fraud on the court, so it vacates the whole case. That's what it's supposed to do, right? Because it's a perversion of justice. You can't pass fraudulent documents and use false oaths in court, right? In English common law, in what we use in our legal system. So these are false oaths. There's so many of them. We knew that the emergency petition was a false oath, which deprived me of my liberty, right? It deprived me of my liberty rights, my freedom, because he removed me. So he violated that due process of law, right? Remember, I'm going to recite again what the due process clause is. It says, no state shall deprive any person. By the way, it's any person, not just U.S. citizens. It applies to non-citizens as well. This 14th Amendment, due process and equal protection, right? It says no state shall deprive any person of their life, liberty, and property without due process of law. And then into the equal protection, because they often work together. Nor shall it deny any person within its jurisdiction of the due process of the law. And I've been denied all of these things. Judge Bonifant has used lies, fabrications in court. He's been committing fraud on the courts, using deception, right? Specious reasoning, right? Poor reasoning to deprive me of my rights, claiming he's trying to protect one right and deny me of a fundamental right. So he was claiming that he didn't want me to be locked up in jail again. So he was trying to make me stay away from my own apartment where I had my property. So he didn't consider that, well, my property is going to be stolen. My property was stolen anyway. There was my certificate of naturalization was stolen. My cash in my home was stolen. We still don't know. My wristwatches, my luxury items, all my things were stolen. Most of my things were stolen. My credit cards, my wallet, my debit card. Money was extracted from, they used my debit card to remove money from my bank account when I was locked up in jail. So my property rights were stolen due to the rogue actions of the state of Maryland as superintended under Judge James Bonifant. So, in any event, the peace order was going to expire. It expired by November, but the judge now continued to use as the condition of my bond that I will not stay there. So the pretext is that, well, the state has filed charges against me, and then he falsely said I was dangerous. There's no evidence of me being dangerous. I haven't attacked anybody. Of course, the state psychiatrists have since stated from jail everywhere. I'd been assaulted. I was actually assaulted when I was locked up in jail. The hospitals he sent me to, I was assaulted. They had to file criminal charges against these people. There was evidence I was assaulted over and over. I never responded. never fought back, never reacted. I was assaulted over and over and over again. When I was assaulted, I was allowed to stay alone in a jail, in a cell, because people that were now threatening my life. They have all sorts of crazy people in jail, right? Dangerous people who've killed people. They're now threatening my life. This was the dangers that James Bonifant's corruption was exposing me to. So in any event, he continued to use a bond, a condition of my bond that I wouldn't stay there. Then in court, he was claiming, this was on July 31st, 2023, when I was saying I wanted to return to my apartment. He said, oh, the people there do not want me to live there, that they don't like me, that they don't want me to live there. And I was stunned that a judge should be saying that, because I have a constitutional right. First of all, he's provided no evidence. Who are the people? The only person that he stated that we have in court, because I've never been in court with anybody in my so that denies me of my due process of law. That's just hearsay. Nobody has taken testimony. I've not been able to cross-examine anybody, right, in that building concerning this building that he's talking about. That who are you that they're telling lies? I haven't had the opportunity to cross-examine them, so that denies me of my Sixth Amendment rights. If there's an accusation against me, if there's a formal charge, I have a right to question and cross-examine them. By the way, I've lived in that place for 2 years. And again, the Fair Housing Act protects me against discrimination. So by Judge Bonifant's logic that, well, the people there don't want me to live there, right? That was what he was saying. He didn't say I killed somebody, I harmed somebody. He didn't say any of that. He just said the people there don't want me to live there. So he placed that as my bond condition, right? That logic would allow the KKK to exclude, that's the Ku Klux Klan, which is a terrorist organization, right? To exclude Black Americans from living in their neighborhoods. The KKK continued to burn crosses, firebomb the homes of Black people that they didn't want to live in their neighborhoods amongst them. So this is what Judge Bonifant, he's talking with the mindset of protecting the Ku Klux Klan. Who are these people? Were they KKK who didn't want me to live there, right? Because I'd never been in any fight with anybody. The only person who'd ever attacked me was Shumi, who came to attack me with Jide Warere on May 14, 2023. And the state of Maryland filed charges against him. Of course, they've suppressed it because of the malicious prosecution of the state attorney, because he's supposed to be a witness. He's not a reliable witness, a trustworthy witness. He's cooked up. He's a fabricated. He's a provocateur. He's an agent provocateur on behalf of the state of Maryland. A racist state attorney's office, John McCarthy's racist state attorney office, that's targeted me, violating my due process, my equal protection of the law rights. So these are things that, these are violations. The 14th Amendment, again, is very crucial, and Judge Bonifant has been violating these rights. Till today, it's 3 years now. My property was stolen. So he denied me due process. That's a due process clause that protects my life, liberty, and my property, that it can be I can't be deprived of them without due process of law. These things were stolen, and he violated the Civil Rights Act of 1968, Title 8 of the Civil Rights Act of 1968. It allows me to live and rent anywhere, and it can't, you can't use discrimination, race, or national origin. And so what Judge Bonifant was saying was pretextual, right? So, and the other thing is there's another fraud and public corruption that Judge Bonifant was probably doing. So it's funny. I'm going to do another video and give the context of why that building, right? Why that building was being protected by Judge Bonifant, and they didn't want me to live there, because I had actually filed a complaint against the building with the Office of the Attorney General, and they were being investigated by the Maryland Commission of Civil Rights for violating my rights. And, they had a property manager who first started with sexual harassment. And I reported that she made a false 911 call. I didn't want to, this was in October, 6 months prior to this incident. I was asked to, at least 6 months. And I was asked to report this person. I didn't, because I didn't want to get I didn't want to, I just didn't want my name to be in court cases or anything like that. But importantly, uh, Judge Bonifant was probably bribed by the landlord, Aeon Management and Landmark at Claremont. That's the name of the property managers, the owners of the property. And their property manager had been harassing me sexually, and I ignored her. And she retaliated by making a false 911 call. The police officer who arrived, Officer Bright, saw that she had made a false call. He asked me to come and file a restraining order or peace order against them. I didn't. I chose not to, but I reported it to the Attorney General. They were investigating them. In April, they sent them a letter notifying them that they might prosecute them, that they would investigate unless they got into mediation with me. They sent them again another letter. I have it in May 17. The building never responded. So that was actually ongoing with the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights. They were investigating them. And these people were sending fabrications. Meanwhile, Judge Bonifant now removes me permanently, saying removed me, saying I can't live there. Now creating false evidence in court, saying, well, that there are neighbors who don't want me to live there. There's no such a thing exists. My neighbor on the fifth floor had, a few days before, the only person I used to talk to, right, had taken me to a restaurant. He still can't believe I was the one that the police came to remove, like the armed forces, they came to remove. He still can't believe it. Who was the one who recorded evidence, and he's testifying on my behalf. I haven't had a trial. But Judge Bonifant is just presenting false evidence in court, making up things, saying, the neighbors don't want me to live there, and I'm saying, no, it's my right to live there, because he's violating my 14th Amendment, equal protection of law and due process of law, which says the state cannot deny me of my life, my liberty, my property without due process of law. And in all likelihood, Judge Bonifant has been bribed, or he's doing it as a personal favor for Landmark, the Aeon Management property owners, right? So he said he was born and raised in Montgomery County, and so he's fabricating evidence. So he's committing fraud on the court, because it doesn't let me state my side, right? Because that building is being investigated by the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights and the Attorney General's office. They were investigating them. Office of Human Rights, many different agencies within Maryland were investigating them. I reported them to the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice, of course, referred me to the office of, the Attorney General. They have offices. The Attorney General refers me to Maryland Commission on Civil Rights. They investigate them first before they decide to prosecute, right? And Judge Bonifant is impeding these things. He's obstructing justice, right? Preventing me, saying, no, you can't live there, violating my rights, that's my property rights, trying to coerce me, place me under duress, to take away my property rights, my interest, my rights to live where I want to live, right? In the area, in the states, within that jurisdiction in America, under the pretext, using just pretext, right? False evidence, fabricated evidence, which is fraud on the court, and the pretext that the state of Maryland has charges against me, which he has been postponing for 3 years, right? So you see his incompetence. He cannot expedite cases. So he's an incompetent judge. In fact, he's retiring this March, in just a few months. But the thing is, I'd already filed a judicial complaint against him for judicial misconduct. So he had a conflict of interest. He's been deciding his own cases. I filed a complaint for him to recuse himself as judge, right? I filed a motion for him to recuse himself due to conflict of interest and due to bias. He's the one who decided. He brought it because he's a circuit administrative judge. He regulates the calendar, right? He creates a calendar. He brings that motion to himself and decides it in court. He said, oh, he's not biased. And he denies it. You can't be asked to decide, your own case, a petition against you. That's counterfactual. It doesn't even make sense. It's unreasonable, right? That's not how our laws work. But Judge Bonifant has been doing the most irrational things. He might be mentally ill. He's a septuagenarian. I'm not an ageist, but Judge Bonifant has been, he's acted like a madman in court. He's not been able to show judicial temperament. My friends have called him crazy. It's there. It's on recorded lines. My friends have they come to court. And he doesn't care. He doesn't care. He's just this old white man who doesn't care. He yells at me in court, even though I'm well behaved. He yells at me. He insults me in court. He was insulting me. You know, these are things that actually they constitute judicial misconduct, because the judges are supposed to show judicial temperament, right? They're supposed to show courtesy. They're not supposed to be partial, right? He talks about me being lucky to be alive, that the police exercised restraints. No, in fact, but the argument that my uh, attorney, my public defender, wants to use is that the police used excessive force, unreasonable, excessive, disproportionate force on me. But this judge is saying that they used uh, restraint, but we haven't gone to trial for us to show you what the police did to me, and he knows, right? He knows this case hasn't been indicted, so he's been trying to act like actually been acting like he's the attorney for the police, for the states, that is engaging in malicious prosecution. He's been protecting police misconduct, which Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes said in Silverthorne Lumber Company versus United States of 1920, that it is a lesser evil that a few criminals escape than for this, that the government, right, should play an ignoble part in misconduct, right, in the deprivation of rights of a citizen. That's regarding the Fourth Amendment and the origin of the derivative, the exclusionary rule for the derivative evidence obtained through an illegal search, a Fourth Amendment violation, which of course is the origin of the fruit of the poisonous tree. Right? The fruit of the poisonous tree was coined later on in 1939 in Nardone versus United States by Justice Frankfurter. In any event, I've tried to show how the 14th Amendment works with the Fourth Amendment, and I've shown a real application and how a judge, Judge James Bonifant of Montgomery County Circuit Court, Maryland, has been violating those rights. So not to just keep these amendments academic, but to show real life applications that, there's a perversion of justice under Judge James Bonifant. It's this egregious judicial misconduct. When a judge is violating your constitutional rights, that's serious judicial misconduct, right? And it's fraud on the court. So I'm going to stop here, and I will continue, and I'll give in detail what happened, how Judge Bonifant has protected, my landlord in order to effect an illegal eviction. That's actually what Judge Bonifant has done. He's effected an illegal eviction by preventing me from renting in a place I was actually already renting. I was not going to start, but he deprived me of my ability. My usufructory rights were first of all violated by the police on May 16th through the swatting and the illegal seizure and a false imprisonment. And then subsequently, he's deprived me of my due process of law rights of the 14th Amendment. Again, that's which says that the state cannot deprive me of my liberty, my life, my liberty, my property without due process of law. And also it infringes my equal protection of the law, because he's doing this because of my race and my national origin. And I'll show that in a subsequent video, because that was the objective of the owners of the building. I've been receiving these false failure to pay notices on my door. And it turns out that other minorities, Black people, were receiving it, right? Because white people were moving into the building. There was this gentrification going on. And it's Montgomery County. Apparently, it's known as a very racist state. It has a very old racist KKK clan history, right? It's very clannish history to it. In any event, my name is Olurotimi Osha. I talk about American presidents, and I've been drawing attention to color of law violations, pivoting on subordination of perjury and fraud on the court by Judge James Bonifant of Montgomery County, Maryland, and his judicial misconduct. In this case, I was talking about how he violated my 14th Amendment rights. That's the due process clause and the equal protection of law clause, and also violating the Fair Housing Act and the Title 8 Civil Rights Act of 1968, which prohibits discrimination in renting and housing and in property based on race, national origin, familial status, or sex. So I'll do more videos and I'll keep you posted. Thank you.